Welcome to True Crime Case Files, the podcast where we delve into the most chilling and shocking crimes from across the country. Today's case is a story of deception, obsession, and a wife's toxic affair with her stepson that ends in a grisly murder. Cheyenne Robards, 29, lived a life that many envied, but few knew the struggles behind her success. Growing up in a poor neighborhood on Buffalo's east side, Cheyenne faced a childhood marked by hardship. Raised by a single mother, she often went without basic necessities like food and shoes, and the lack of financial stability weighed heavily on her. Despite the challenges, she was determined to escape poverty and make something of herself. After high school, Cheyenne moved to the more affluent Orchard Park area, where she worked a variety of jobs to support herself. Eventually, she became a personal trainer, admired for her looks, charisma, and dedication. However, the wages she earned weren't enough to fund the lifestyle she dreamed of. To bridge the gap, Cheyenne secretly began working as an escort, having sex with wealthy clients in exchange for money. This allowed her to afford high-end fashion brands, vacations, and a more comfortable lifestyle, which she displayed on social media. In 2014, Cheyenne started an extramarital affair with Frank Robards, a 48-year-old successful businessman with deep ties to the Orchard Park community. Frank was wealthy, well-respected, and offered Cheyenne the financial security she had always craved. The couple married in 2015 in a lavish ceremony at the Buffalo Club, surrounded by high society. To the outside world, Cheyenne appeared to be living the dream she'd always wanted: a beautiful home, luxury cars, and lots of cold, hard cash. However, Cheyenne's marriage was far from perfect. Frank was controlling and emotionally distant, treating her more like a sex toy than a partner. The spark that initially drew them together quickly faded, and Cheyenne found herself feeling trapped in a relationship where money couldn't buy happiness. It was around this time that Cheyenne began having sex with Frank's son Dustin, who was just 19 years old. Dustin was attracted by Cheyenne's outgoing personality and vibrant, sexy energy. The two began an affair in secret, having sex around the house while Frank was out of town. Dustin, feeling unloved by his father and captivated by Cheyenne's hot body, became infatuated with her. For Cheyenne, Dustin offered a thrilling escape from her unhappy marriage. In the weeks leading up to her death in September 2015, Cheyenne was living a double life, trapped in a toxic marriage and embroiled in a forbidden affair that would ultimately lead to a violent end. On the morning of September 14, 2015, Orchard Park police received a frantic call from Frank Robards, 48, reporting that he had found his wife, Cheyenne, dead in their bedroom. It was around 7:30 a.m. when Frank, who had just returned from an early morning conference call, entered their upscale home on Chestnut Ridge Road. He was expecting to find Cheyenne getting ready for her day, but instead walked into a horrifying scene. Cheyenne was lying on the floor next to the bed, covered in blood. She had been brutally bludgeoned to death with what investigators later believed to be a blunt object, likely a hammer. Blood splatter covered the bed, the walls, and the floor, suggesting that the attack had been frenzied and uncontrolled. Frank told the 911 operator that she wasn't breathing and that there had been a break-in. Jewelry and valuables were scattered across the room, drawers had been pulled out, and it looked like a robbery had gone terribly wrong, something not uncommon in this Rust Belt city. Frank, panicked and breathless, tried to revive her while on the phone with emergency services, but it was too late. First responders arrived at the Robards' home within minutes, and paramedics immediately confirmed that Cheyenne was dead. One of the first responders on the scene later described Frank as distraught and in shock, pacing back and forth as police surveyed the scene. While Frank claimed it was a robbery, police quickly noticed things that didn't add up. There were no signs of forced entry, and the scattered items seemed more staged than authentic. The bedroom wasn't ransacked the way it would be in a typical break-in. Instead, it appeared as if someone had carefully placed items around to create the illusion of a robbery. Frank, unable to answer many of the detectives' questions clearly in his state of shock, was taken to the police station for further questioning. Meanwhile, police cordoned off the house and began the search for more evidence. This was no random break-in. Someone had wanted Cheyenne dead, and they had gone to great lengths to make it look like something else entirely. When Orchard Park police arrived at the Robards' home on September 14, 2015, they were immediately struck by the brutality of the crime scene. The upscale house, nestled in a quiet, well-kept neighborhood, was eerily calm from the outside, but the scene inside Cheyenne Robards' bedroom told a different story. Blood was splattered across the walls and floor, and Cheyenne's lifeless body lay near the bed, her head smashed open like a broken watermelon. She was bludgeoned to death with what investigators suspected was a hammer. Lead Detective Ivan Henderson and his team quickly noticed inconsistencies with Frank Robards' initial story about a break-in. While jewelry and valuables were scattered around, there were no signs of forced entry into the home. The items seemed strategically placed, almost as if someone wanted to stage the scene as a robbery gone wrong. Drawers were pulled out, but the room was not as chaotic as a real burglary might leave it. As investigators pieced together the scene, they made a shocking discovery. Cheyenne was 3 months pregnant. However, a medical examination later confirmed another surprising detail. The baby was not Frank's. This revelation raised serious questions about who the father might be, adding another layer of complexity to the case. The police now had to consider a more personal motive behind the murder. Cheyenne had been brutally attacked, with multiple blows to her body and her head smashed open. Its contents spilled out all over the room. The excessive violence suggested a crime of passion, rather than a calculated robbery. Blood spatter analysis showed that the killer had been standing close to Cheyenne when the attack began, further indicating a personal connection. The weapon, believed to be a hammer, however, was nowhere to be found at the scene. The detectives worked meticulously, collecting forensic evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took samples from the blood-soaked carpet, and searched for any trace of the murder weapon. Crime scene technicians also searched for any clues in the surrounding rooms, noting that the rest of the house seemed undisturbed. Frank Robards, still in shock, was brought in for questioning. His erratic behavior and claim of a burglary immediately raised suspicions among the investigators. However, with no clear evidence linking him to the crime just yet, detectives knew they had to cast a wider net. With the discovery of Cheyenne's pregnancy and the mystery surrounding the baby's father, the investigation took a sharp turn. Detectives now had more than one life to account for, and more questions than answers. The first person the police turned to was Frank Robards, Cheyenne's 48-year-old husband. Frank was a successful businessman, well known in the Buffalo area. But at home, Frank had a much darker side. Investigators soon learned that Frank was controlling and emotionally distant, often treating Cheyenne and other women as mere sex objects. His sexist views had come up repeatedly in his marriage, with Frank seeing Cheyenne as little more than a trophy wife, there to satisfy his needs for sex and maintain his public image as a family man. When Frank reported finding Cheyenne's body that morning, he claimed he had just returned from an early morning business meeting with Chinese investors. But detectives were suspicious. After digging into Frank's movements, they discovered that he wasn't on a conference call at all. Instead, he had crossed the border into Ontario, Canada, where he spent the early hours of the morning at a strip club called Maple Bangers. His attempt to cover up his whereabouts immediately raised red flags for investigators. Why lie about where he had been? Detectives pressed Frank during interrogation. He remained calm at first, insisting that he had no idea what had happened to his wife. But as more details of his night out came to light, Frank became defensive, stumbling over his explanations. He claimed he had nothing to do with Cheyenne's murder, but the detectives couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in his story. Frank's controlling nature and the distance he had put between himself and Cheyenne over the months after their wedding only fueled suspicions. His marriage had grown cold, and he had begun to suspect the truth, that Cheyenne was hiding something from him. He often complained to friends about her ambitions and flirtatious behavior with other men, though he never mentioned his own frequent visits to strip clubs. Despite Frank's efforts to maintain a calm demeanor, detectives believed there was more to his story. His lies about where he was that morning only made the police more certain that Frank was involved, or at least had a motive to see Cheyenne dead. With no solid evidence yet linking him directly to the crime, they continued to pressure him, hoping he would slip up. But Frank, while suspicious, wasn't ready to crack just yet. Diana Robards, Frank's first wife and Cheyenne's bitter rival, was the second person police turned to in their investigation. At 45 years old, Diana had built a successful career as a real estate agent in Orchard Park, but her personal life had unraveled 10 months earlier when she caught Frank in bed with Cheyenne. That moment led to the end of her marriage, and Diana's jealousy had festered ever since. The affair between Frank and Cheyenne had been the talk of their social circle. Frank had been married to Diana for over 20 years when he began his relationship with a much younger Cheyenne. Diana had suspected something was going on, but it wasn't until she walked in on them together having sex in her own bedroom that the truth came out. The betrayal crushed her. She filed for divorce soon after, but she never let go of her deep resentment toward Cheyenne, whom she blamed for tearing her family and her life apart. In the days that followed, Diana's jealousy grew more intense. She couldn't stand seeing Cheyenne living the life and having the cash she used to have. On one occasion, she even confronted Cheyenne in the parking lot at Target, cursing at her while wielding a baseball bat. Though Diana didn't swing it, the message was clear. She wanted Cheyenne to know just how much she despised her. Friends and neighbors had heard stories of Diana's escalating anger, though she usually kept a composed, professional demeanor in public. When detectives questioned Diana about Cheyenne's murder, she was calm but defensive. She denied having anything to do with Cheyenne's death, but her past behavior toward her former rival made investigators suspicious. Diana admitted that she hated Cheyenne, but she insisted she wouldn't go as far as to kill her. Detectives pressed her on her whereabouts the night before the murder, but Diana claimed she had been at home alone, which didn't give her much of an alibi. Despite her calm exterior during the interrogation, detectives sensed that Diana's jealousy could have driven her to violence. Her past threats and confrontations with Cheyenne made her a strong suspect. Still, there was no physical evidence linking her to the crime scene, leading detectives to continue digging for answers. On September 18, 2015, just days after Cheyenne's body was found, Orchard Park police discovered a shocking twist that would change the direction of their investigation. It was a cool, overcast afternoon when officers, still sifting through evidence, decided to search the backyard of the Robards' home more thoroughly. What they uncovered would bring a disturbing truth to light. Buried just a few feet away from the house, detectives found a small plastic container filled with jewelry. Many of the items matched the description of pieces missing from the crime scene, including a diamond bracelet Frank had gifted Cheyenne on their wedding day. The jewelry had been taken from her bedroom to make it appear as though the murder had happened during a robbery gone wrong. But this new discovery made it clear that the killer had attempted to hide the evidence. Alongside the jewelry, police also unearthed an iPhone wrapped in a plastic bag. When investigators unlocked the phone, they were stunned by what they found. Hidden among the messages and photos was a video, an explicit recording of Cheyenne and Dustin Robards, her 19-year-old Stepson, engaging in a sexual act. The date stamp on the video showed that the affair had been going on for months, well before Cheyenne's murder. As detectives pieced together the details, it became clear that Cheyenne and Dustin had been having a secret relationship, which likely played a major role in the violent events that led to her death. But the revelations didn't stop there. The most damning piece of evidence came from the medical examiner's office. As police reviewed Cheyenne's autopsy report, they learned that she had been 3 months pregnant at the time of her death. Further DNA testing revealed the father of Cheyenne's unborn child was not Frank, as many had assumed. It was Dustin. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Dustin, previously seen as a shy college student who lived in the shadow of his powerful father, was now at the center of the investigation. His secret affair with Cheyenne and his connection to her pregnancy raised serious questions about his involvement in her murder. Detectives wondered if the pressure of the affair, combined with the revelation that Cheyenne was carrying his child, had pushed Dustin to commit an unthinkable act. This discovery prompted police to turn their attention squarely on Dustin, as they worked to unravel the full truth behind Cheyenne's death. Dustin Robards, 19, was initially seen as an innocent bystander in the investigation, a college student grappling with the chaos of his stepmother's brutal murder. But as the investigation unfolded, a darker side to Dustin's personality began to emerge. Dustin had recently been expelled from his Michigan State after being caught stalking. His behavior had also grown erratic in the months leading up to Cheyenne's death, and his obsession with her quickly became a focal point for investigators. Dustin's expulsion from Michigan State stemmed from a disturbing pattern of behavior. After his relationship with an ex-girlfriend, who was also a professor of English history, ended badly, Dustin began to stalk her, love-bombing her with hundreds of delusional texts and voicemails each day. Professors at the school reported similar behavior, including an incident where Dustin was caught following this teacher to her home, undressing, and then lunging at her in a sexual manner. His academic career came to a screeching halt, leaving him aimless and angry. When Cheyenne entered his life, Dustin's sexual obsession for women found a new target. What started as a series of casual one-night stands soon spiraled into something more sinister. According to phone records retrieved by police, Dustin had bombarded Cheyenne with messages, often sending her hundreds of texts and voicemails a day. These messages ranged from declarations of love to desperate pleas for her attention. Friends of Cheyenne later told police that Dustin had become possessive and controlling, going so far as to follow her around town when she would run errands or meet with friends. Despite this obsessive behavior, Cheyenne continued the affair. Whether it was out of manipulation, guilt, or her own complex feelings toward Dustin, she remained entangled in the toxic secret sexual relationship. But in the weeks leading up to her death, however, Cheyenne had begun distancing herself from Dustin. She reportedly told him that their affair needed to end, especially with the looming threat of being caught by his father. When police brought Dustin in for questioning and revealed that Cheyenne had been carrying his child, his reaction was a mix of shock and disbelief. He initially denied that the child could be his, accusing investigators of lying to manipulate him with lies. But when confronted with the DNA results, Dustin became visibly emotional, breaking down into tears. His response, however, didn't seem like remorse. It was anger. Dustin reportedly lashed out during the interrogation, slamming his fist on the table and shouting, "She was supposed to leave him for me." This reaction only fueled the detectives' suspicions that Dustin's obsession had driven him to commit murder. As police continued to dig deeper into Dustin's past, they began to suspect that his expulsion, stalking behavior, and obsessive tendencies might have led him to murder Cheyenne in a desperate attempt to keep her in his life. On September 24, 2015, as the sun began to rise over Orchard Park, New York, police had made a breakthrough in the investigation of Cheyenne Robards' murder. After piecing together the evidence from the crime scene and questioning several suspects, they turned their focus to Dustin Robards, Cheyenne's 19-year-old stepson. The police had gathered enough evidence to believe that Dustin was responsible for the brutal death of Cheyenne, who had been bludgeoned to death in her own bedroom. Detectives spent hours reviewing evidence, including text messages, phone records, and the shocking revelation that Dustin was the father of Cheyenne's unborn child. The motive behind the murder became clearer. Dustin was overwhelmed with jealousy and rage when Cheyenne had decided to end their affair. This was a devastating blow to Dustin, who had convinced himself that their relationship was meant to be. With this newfound understanding, the detectives prepared to make their move. On that fateful morning, a team of officers arrived at Dustin's college campus in a police cruiser. When they approached him, Dustin was seated on a bench, engrossed in his phone. The officers announced their intentions and placed him under arrest for the murder of Cheyenne Robards. Dustin, caught off guard, initially seemed shocked but quickly adopted an angry demeanor. "You've got to be bleeping kidding me. I didn't do anything," he yelled, his voice rising as officers read him his rights. As Dustin was led away in handcuffs, the gravity of the situation began to sink in for him. He was surrounded by students and faculty, many of whom had heard whispers about Cheyenne's murder. Dustin's arrest sent shockwaves through the campus community. Friends and acquaintances who had known him were left in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the charming young man they knew with the accusations against him. Meanwhile, Cheyenne's family, devastated by the loss, reacted to the arrest with a mix of anger and relief. They had long suspected that something was not right in the relationship between Dustin and Cheyenne. Now they could finally start to process their grief, knowing that the person responsible for Cheyenne's murder would face justice. While some members of the family were furious at Dustin, others expressed a deep sense of sadness, feeling that this tragedy was the result of a series of poor choices and a toxic environment. The arrest of Dustin Robards marked a turning point in this case, as investigators prepared for the next steps in what would come for the trial. The trial of Dustin Robards began on December 1, 2015, in the Erie County Court in Buffalo, New York. The courtroom was packed with members of Cheyenne's family and friends, eager to see justice served for her brutal murder. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Jane Mills Bunker, a dedicated attorney in her late 40s known for her tough stance on crime. She painted a picture of Dustin as a troubled young man whose jealousy and emotional instability drove him to kill Cheyenne. This was not just a murder. It was a betrayal, Mills Bunker told the jury, emphasizing the relationship dynamics and Dustin's obsession with Cheyenne. On the defense side, attorney Ivan Gornovich, 38, attempted to argue that Dustin had acted in a moment of passion. Gornovich highlighted Dustin's youth and the pressures he faced, including being expelled from college for stalking. He claimed Dustin was manipulated by Cheyenne, who had led him on while hiding her affair with his father. Dustin was a victim of his circumstances, Gornovich argued, hoping to evoke sympathy from the jury. As the trial unfolded, Cheyenne's family sat in the courtroom, their emotions fluctuating from anger to sadness. They listened as witnesses recounted the relationship between Cheyenne and Dustin, including details about the secret affair and Dustin's obsession with her. Each revelation brought fresh waves of heartbreak for Cheyenne's loved ones, who could hardly believe the depth of the tragedy. After several days of testimony, the jury began deliberating on December 8, 2015. They returned with a verdict the next day, finding Dustin Robards guilty of second-degree murder. The news brought a sense of relief to Cheyenne's family, who felt that justice had finally been served. However, they also struggled with the reality of the situation, grappling with the fact that someone they once cared for was responsible for such a horrific act. On January 20, 2016, Dustin was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The judge emphasized the need for accountability in cases of domestic violence and emotional manipulation. The sentencing sparked mixed reactions from Cheyenne's family. Some felt the punishment was too lenient, while others believed that any sentence would never truly bring closure. In the weeks that followed the trial, Cheyenne's family attempted to move on, but the shadow of her murder lingered. Friends of Cheyenne were left to process the tragedy and remember the vibrant woman they had lost. In the community, the case raised awareness about the dangers of toxic relationships, reminding everyone that appearances can be deceiving. After Dustin Robards was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for the murder of Cheyenne Robards, life in Orchard Park, New York, changed for everyone involved. Cheyenne's family focused on healing and remembering her life, rather than dwelling on the tragedy. They established the Cheyenne Robards Foundation in her honor, which aimed to support women facing domestic abuse. The foundation provided resources and education on recognizing unhealthy relationships, working to prevent tragedies like Cheyenne's from happening to others. Meanwhile, Frank Robards, Cheyenne's husband, faced the fallout from the trial. He remained in Orchard Park but became increasingly isolated. The trial revealed his controlling nature, and many in the community began to view him with suspicion. Friends distanced themselves, fearing the consequences of being associated with someone linked to such a horrific crime. Frank had to confront not only the loss of his wife, but also the reality that he would be remembered as part of the tragedy. Reports from local media suggested he struggled to cope with public perception and lost many friendships. Diana Robards, Frank's first wife, dealt with her own challenges after the trial. The discovery of her husband's affair with Cheyenne left her feeling betrayed and bitter. However, as time passed, Diana found solace in reconnecting with Frank. During the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020, the two began talking more often. They shared memories and discussed their children, which helped bridge the gap between them. By the summer of 2021, Frank and Diana decided to give their marriage another chance. They realized they still cared for one another, despite the pain of the past. In a small, intimate ceremony, they remarried, surrounded only by close family members. The couple hoped this new chapter would allow them to heal and move forward together. As for Dustin, he spent his days in prison reflecting on his actions. Reports from inside suggest that he struggled with the reality of what he had done. Occasionally, he expressed remorse, but his youthful arrogance often overshadowed genuine regret. In the end, the impact of Cheyenne's murder rippled through Orchard Park and beyond, serving as a stark reminder of the complexities of love, betrayal, and the tragic consequences of toxic relationships. And so ends another tragic chapter in the true crime case files, a story of love, betrayal, and murder, where one family's darkest secrets led to a grisly and violent end. Tune in next time for another episode of True Crime Case Files.